Hello everyone, welcome to Mitchmatics. So for this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you the key features of dot plots. And so there's a few considerations that you need to know when it comes to looking at dot plots. And I color coded them here. So if you look at where all of your X's or all your dots are mostly centered around, if you see that there's more X's under or on top of one number, that is called the peak of the data. So if you look right here where it says red, the peak, the highest point of the data, this is where the data occurs the most. So that's where 2 is. So we have more 2's in our data set than any other. And so that peak is really important because it can help us tell the data distributions, which we're going to get into a little bit later. So that's also something we call the frequency. That's the two repeats 3 times. That's the frequency of the data. So another key thing to know is that sometimes your data will have gaps. So gaps is just where you do not have any data points and it's interrupted. So if you notice right here between 4 and 7, you have a gap where it says it's green, and then if you actually look over here too where it's where 8 is, between 8 and 12 you have another gap. So gaps is just where there's no data because the data wasn't perfect, and that happens sometimes. Lastly, there is a cluster. A cluster is just where you see all the data together. So just think of being clustered together for warmth with a friend, or during winter. So just imagine that you're huddling for warmth, and that's how I kind of think of clustered. I'm clustered together in a tight confined space. So if you look there at 2, 3, and 4, all of these have data points, so they are clustered. Now, there's one more key thing that you need to know. Typically, what we call these are called outliers. And what outliers are, they're data points that are really big or really small, and they're not near where most of the data is. So if you look at this really quickly and look at the 12, this X is pretty isolated. You can think of him on an isolated island, and that's what we call an outlier. A data point that's too large or too small and doesn't represent the rest of the data. So I can call this an outlier. Let me do a different color. Let me do black. So this is what we call an outlier. An outlier is just a data point that is large or small compared to the rest of the data. It's compared to the entire rest of the data. So I like to think of him as an isolated island. So if you notice how he's not anywhere near the rest of the X's, that's how you can tell that he's an outlier. So those are the key characteristics. I'm going to get into a little bit more depth, but a few more things to know about line plots. Again, line plots, they just are a visual display so that you can see how the data is organized. So I can see that most of the data is right here between 2 through 4. Another thing is that the spread of the data is a really key vocabulary word, and what that means is it's how similar the data points are to each other. And so the spread just means, is it very far apart? Is it very close? And so you can kind of think of it like slime. If I have slime and I spread it all the way across, that's really spread apart. But if I put my slime back together in one pile, it's really close together. And that's the same with the data points. So if you look right here at the data, all of these X's are pretty put together. So you can think of it like a slime ball, tightly packed. But if I had all my X's and they were everywhere else on the sides, then that would be a lot of spread. Another key thing is the distribution, which is just basically explaining the shape of it. We're going to get into a little bit more about that, but just distribution has to do with where the data is and how much it occurs. And then finally, the interval. So an interval is just a range of values. So if I was to say in this one what the interval of this is, if I wanted to say the interval of this data range, I would just find where my lowest value is of my data and the highest. So if I look at the lowest, my lowest is at 0 and my highest is at 12. So my range is from 0 to 12, and that's what I mean by interval. So those are a few key things. There's going to be a few more videos, but I hope this helped you out. Let me know if you need further assistance. So thank you for watching.